So love it or hate it, Kingdom Hearts has been one of video gaming's most notable successes over the last 20 years. It spawned 8 games, and then some if you count all the re-releases, and unless you've been hiding under a rock lately, you know that the counterintuitively titled Kingdom Hearts 3 is releasing just around the corner. And while this video could have probably been more beneficial to the gaming world as a whole back before KH3 was originally announced so the developers could possibly see it and keep it in mind when they were making the game, 1, I wasn't even making consistent content until well after its announcement, and 2, I didn't even stumble upon this topic until the game was already well into development. So I've kinda just been sitting on this topic looking to make bank on the Kingdom Hearts 3 wave when that comes to hit late December, early January. Look, us crazy people need to make money too, and the ad revenue on YouTube has only been getting tighter. Starting with the first game in the franchise going forward, there's always been this kind of surreal tone to the story, where lines might be cheesy, some actor deliveries are offbeat, and plot points seemingly come out of nowhere for the sake of a momentary mystery only to be explained shortly thereafter. And yet, in spite of these problems, the games still work, maybe even because of them. The games take themselves way too seriously, but in that endeavor they're infinitely endearing, a story that's so earnest it wins people over purely on the charisma of its pieces, players, and producers. You need not look further than the rabid fanbase that's evolved around the series to understand that. But that doesn't mean there aren't problems that eat away at this endearment, and what I'm about to talk about today is probably the biggest hit to the series overall. Pacing. Pacing is one of the most important elements of writing a story and one of the easiest to screw up. Even if events unfold in a diegetic way, there can sometimes be moments during a story where it drags. Either because it's been pushing the gas pedal through the floor too long and the audience has become fatigued, or because it has ground the story to a halt and what momentum it had has gone flying out the nearest window. Every writer in the world will tell you that maintaining a consistent, healthy pace where the audience isn't bored but also isn't overexerted is a struggle. And this is where Kingdom Hearts as a franchise falls into some issues. Now let me get this clear, I do in fact love these games. They're probably my current favorite gaming franchise since Halo's taking a goddamn nosedive right now. But as a fan, I have to admit that most of the games after Chain of Memories have had problems trying to tell their stories. Birth by Sleep forces you to play through the same worlds 3 times with different character profiles just to get the full story. Dream Drop Distance had similar problems flashing between 2 characters in such a way that you can be constantly interrupted during vital story moments. And even my favorite game in the franchise, 358 Days Over 2, yeah, I'm not going to even try defending the often draining, rather restrictive mission structure. Admittedly, each of these games had their way of smoothing that over. Birth by Sleep had variants as to what areas you could go to as certain characters. You could mitigate the drop mechanic in Dream Drop Distance with certain items, and the mission structure in 358 Days Over 2 typically works fine if you treat it more like an early mobile game and take it in short bursts. But the one that always gets my goat and was the progenitor of these issues is the game that everyone praises as the best in the franchise, Kingdom Hearts 2. While I adore the hell out of Kingdom Hearts 2, I don't think I was ever under the impression that it was ever the best. In many ways, it kind of felt like the bump in the budget and development time went to the wrong ends. Instead of making the worlds richer, it just made them bigger. Instead of making new abilities more diverse, it made older ones more complicated to obtain, and instead of making the story better, it just made the story longer. What do I mean by this? Well, let me give you a rundown of the rough structures of Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. Once we have that out of the way, I'll be able to make my point more clearly. Kingdom Hearts 1 starts you off on Destiny Island, which serves as a tutorial and the big establishing moments for our main protagonist Sora. After his world is seemingly consumed by darkness, he wakes up in a place called Traverse Town where world refugees seem to magically flock. From there he runs into an assortment of Final Fantasy characters who give him a rundown on who the main enemies are, the Heartless, though their explanations are only halfway there, saying that their old leader Ansem knew more but vanished when their world was eaten. After running into Donald and Goofy, the 3 agree to help each other look for missing counterparts. Donald and Goofy are looking for King Mickey, Sora is looking for his friends from the island, and the Final Fantasy cast also make a bid for them to look for Ansem. Then the rest of the game opens up. You explore 3 Disney worlds, complete their stories, and in the process, get new abilities that open up sections present back in Traverse Town. This opens up a secondary plot in Traverse Town that ends with another boss fight and with the opening of new worlds to travel to. So you go out, visit 5 more Disney worlds, make a brief stop back at Traverse Town, and head out for the second last world to explore, Hollow Bastion. During all of this, typically before or after each world, we get a sneak peek into events going on behind the scenes with a group of united Disney villains that we end up defeating along the way, as well as a number of flashbacks that help fill out crucial plot and character details relating to the Destiny Island crew. The plot comes to a boiling point at Hollow Bastion where we find possibly the hardest mandatory fights in the game, discover Ansem was actually the one pulling the strings of the villains and the Heartless, and an entire segment where you yourself have to play as a Heartless. We end up having to retreat from Hollow Bastion, wind up back at Traverse Town one last time to solve a riddle, get some cathartic time to spend with one of our formerly missing friends, then head out to finish the second last world. This opens up the final world, and from that point forward, it's just a gauntlet of enemies and bosses till we reach a 10-stage final boss fight with Ansem. There's victory, but the ending is still bittersweet, with all 3 Islander friends separated with only the smallest glimmer of hope at reuniting to keep them driven. The last scene is of Sora, Donald, and Goofy chasing after the next big clue for their adventure. In the long run, it's a relatively straightforward adventure, always pushing into new worlds and only occasionally revisiting old locations when new pathways have opened up. Now consider Kingdom Hearts 2. The game opens with a completely new character, Roxas, and his adventures around Twilight Town at the tail end of his summer vacation. A mystery involving an old mansion and a series of strange phenomena lead him to discover that he's actually trapped in a simulation and in fact he himself isn't technically real. At the end of the tutorial, he finds Sora and accepts that he's just actually a figment of Sora's existence, fading away so that Sora can wake up and resume the journey that he started at the end of Kingdom Hearts 1. After that, we go to a wizard tower and immediately learn just about everything relevant about the new antagonist, Organization 13 and their henchmen, the Nobodies. From there, we go to Hollow Bastion, encounter the organization in its entirety, and set off to foil their plans across every single Disney world in the game. There's a brief interlude where one of the Islander friends shows back up in Twilight Town just after we complete the first 3 Disney worlds, but other than that, our adventure through each world goes relatively unimpeded. After we complete each Disney world, well, technically speaking, Atlantica is optional, which is a frickin' blessing. We go back to Hollow Bastion for what amounts to a pretty epic battle between the town's inhabitants, the Heartless, and the Nobodies. Once that's done and over with, we go and visit each and every Disney World a second time, solve the new problems that crop up there, then head back to Twilight Town where we can embark upon the final world in the game. After that, it's a straight shot to the last boss, who's a 5-stage extravaganza. There's even a completely happy ending this time around. So if I were teaching a class, I'd throw out a question like, someone please point out where Kingdom Hearts 2 screwed up. But this isn't a class and you have no way to really give me feedback beyond liking the video, commenting on the video, subscribing to my channel, and donating to me on Patreon. Just like Saberthrib, David Upchurch, and Buck S18, whose donations broke the space-time continuum and I was actually able to hear their answer to my question before I actually asked it. They gave the correct answer, as did all my other lovely patrons, but I still think it'd be pretty presumptive of me to ask that in any kind of serious capacity, so I'll just launch into what went wrong. There are actually a number of small places where Kingdom Hearts 2 trips over itself, and I think the one that seems most innocuous is actually the one that does the most damage to the game's sense of pacing. It's the point at the very beginning of the game where Yen Sid tells Sora about the Nobodies in the Wizard Tower. Why? Because he tells Sora everything about the Nobodies. Kingdom Hearts 1 had a similar scene with Leon, Yuffie, and Aeris all describing the Heartless and what they do, but the way they treat them is with fear and concern, and their knowledge base is incomplete. To them, the Heartless are more akin to a zombie plague, a force of nature to compete against, and to a large degree that's what the Heartless are, a mindless horde looking to consume the hearts of people and worlds. But there were things they were unaware of, such as Ansem's influence over them, their ability to be manipulative and cunning, the ability to be manipulated themselves by those with impure hearts, and of course the ability to resurrect someone after becoming a Heartless. Meanwhile, in Kingdom Hearts 2, Yen Sid gives us just about everything to accurately gauge the new threat. The means by which they can be created, their relative power scaling, approximate body count, their leadership structure, phone number, credit card number, social security number, hell, the only thing we don't get out of him is their friggin' home address. I can only figure the reason he didn't give it to us is that if he did, there would be no game to speak of. Literally the only thing we do for the rest of the game is to try and find out where the Nobodies are and what they're doing. And fine, that's a solid premise. Find the bad guys, figure out their plan, foil it. On paper, it's a stock standard plot, but it works. Except, it doesn't. Your interactions with members of Organization 13 is painfully limited throughout the game, especially during the Disney worlds where, for the most part, you're just taking care of the problems unique to that world. Albeit the Heartless get involved, but rarely are Organization members ever really involved themselves. Sure, you trade quips with Luxord at Port Royal, and hell, you even kill Xaldin at Beast's Castle, but outside of that, if it isn't Hollow Bastion, Twilight Town, or the world that never was, you're not going to see a main antagonist. This means when the end of the game finally arrives, the remaining bad guys are kinda dumped on us with no real time to flesh them out. We get to learn about their leaders in this just fine, but everyone else seems like an afterthought. The most well-developed was Xaldin, and that was only because he was intimately tied with the events back at Beast's Castle, and is the only member we actually get to fight in a Disney world. Meanwhile, Xigbar, Luxord, Saïx, and Demyx are left almost completely underdeveloped past their two-dimensional trappings. This issue gets most exacerbated with the quote-unquote war scene back at Hollow Bastion. During the battle, we actually get a pretty extensive amount of interaction with the Organization members, including the Big Cheese himself. But afterward, we're thrown right back to square one. Float around the Disney worlds a second time, save them from their own asinine problems a second time, interact with a grand total of 2 of the game's actual villains, and then rush off to fight the rest of the actual big bads back at their own castle. Back in Kingdom Hearts 1, this wasn't much of an issue because the villains of each Disney world were the big bads up to a point. We got an understanding that they were the ones utilizing the Heartless on their own worlds, and in fact Maleficent was leading them in a search for the 7 princesses that would ultimately let them control all of the worlds. Visiting each Disney world felt important because we were actually fighting our direct antagonist, and when we finally carved our way through the chain of succession, we were rewarded by learning who the real mastermind was. Perhaps it isn't quite fair to Kingdom Hearts 2 since the villains from the Disney films had pre-established personalities and histories to draw from, but then again, there's no reason the Disney villains in the second game couldn't have been involved somehow with the organization. What we ultimately got was the feeling that every single Disney world was just some kind of side quest to bide time until we were allowed to fight the real big bads at the end. This became especially apparent when the second half of the game rolled around and we barely saw hide or hair of the organization, and at least for me, that ground the story's momentum to a halt. Even back when I was young and impressionable, I got the feeling that something was off about the game in comparison to the first, and now I see that these return trips to the Disney worlds felt like less of a vital contribution to the plot and more like a chore to complete in order to progress the story. The charisma of the Disney villains were being used to just rehash the plot lines from the movies they were from instead of creating something new like most of the worlds in Kingdom Hearts 1. And while we got glimmers of that originality in some of the worlds, most notably Beast Capital and Olympus Coliseum, their structures were cut in half and presented in two disparate parts in order to artificially lengthen the game. So with the problem identified, how would one go about fixing this? Well, for one, have Yen Sid be far less knowledgeable about the nobodies. I get it, he's supposed to be the wise and old mentor figure, maybe even precognizant, but giving us this much detail about the nobodies right off the bat, especially when we won't see one for hours, is kind of throwing the concept of fear of the unknown completely under the bus. Instead, have him give scant details, show us the Dusks fine, but then have that be the limit. He can acknowledge that they seem to move with a purpose, and he can't ascertain what that purpose is or who might be pulling the strings. The fact that this wise man, this sage, can't discern that should be troubling to our main protagonist and spur them on to find out more. Then when the organization first shows up, we don't quite connect the dots. Setting the organization up as a force interfering with the natural balance of each world in the first half of the game, as some kind of faceless puppet masters, should be the priority. Sure, fine, you can have your rehashes of Mulan's plot, of Pirates of the Caribbean, of Lion King, of Aladdin, of Nightmare Before Christmas, but make the organization more instrumental in pushing those plots forward, of being the ones goading the Disney villains into action in a similar way that Xaldin was testing the Beast. In this way, we can see and learn more about each member of the organization. Then, in one of the worlds Demyx has been messing with, not just running around stealing plot devices, have him accidentally slip up and reveal something to Sora, like the nature of nobodies. And that's when we get our return to Hollow Bastion, where Demyx is forced to eliminate Sora due to his mistake. From that point forward, the organization starts to get more overt with their actions, as Sora has proven he can best one of their own, so it's now in their best interest to speed up their own timetable. This is where we would get more of Luxord at Port Royal, learning that he convinced Barbossa to mutiny Jack, or Saïx and how he was the one that pushed the Huns to invade the Land of the Dragons, or Xigbar twistedly manipulating Jafar. Hell, throw in a world that Axel was in charge of that he's using as a safe haven now while on the run from the organization. One where he and Sora can have another brief but tense conversation that walks around all of the important subjects. From a writing perspective, these are small changes to make, a veritable nip and tuck job, but with that it makes the flow of the game feel more intuitive. Your mission starts out trying to find your friends and get the deets on the bad guys. Once one of them slip up, the rest of them go hard into their jobs and you have to double back into the other worlds in order to stop them before they make things even worse. You don't even need to make any new bosses for this to work. Now, most, I imagine, are going to bring up Maleficent and Peach, who are shifting from world to world trying to rebuild their powerful alliances from Kingdom Hearts 1. And if you do bring them up, I have to ask back, what about them? When you pull back, Maleficent and Pete ultimately play no role in the story besides serving as a temporary Deus Ex Machina near the end of the game. They promise they'll return, but nothing they really do contributes to anything involving the organization or Kingdom Hearts. I think if Yen Sid didn't already tell Sora about the organization, their presence would have been a far stronger red herring as to who the villain was. If we didn't know who was controlling the nobodies, and then we saw Maleficent strutting around talking about rebuilding, we might have put two and two together in a way that left us second guessing who was the bigger threat. Maleficent's return, or these guys with really amazing taste in coats. That is until the halfway point when it becomes clear that the organization are really the main villains. Now you might find it interesting, but I haven't really mentioned Roxas' segment in the game, which is usually the most divisive part about Kingdom Hearts 2 within the fandom. Many call it plotting and unnecessary, and I can typically give it to them that the tutorial itself can be pretty slow and handholdy. Kingdom Hearts 1 had you discover the rules and toolsets of the game through a more sandbox approach, and in comparison this one is a veritable prison. However, if you tell me his story is plotting, I couldn't disagree more. Roxas' discovery of self is one of the most heartfelt builds in the game, and the tragedy of his world falling down around him is palpable, entering that beautifully surreal point in the Uncanny Valley to get the point across. It's like waking up on The Truman Show, but instead of Jim Carrey and Ed Harris, it's Jesse McCartney and Christopher Lee. It's awesome! Back on topic, the pacing issues in Kingdom Hearts 2 seem to pervade most of the other games following it. I've already mentioned this, but Birth by Sleep, 358 Days Over 2, and Dream Drop Distance all kinda suffer in their own unique ways. And I think that's because they keep trying to reinvent the wheel. Both introducing 3 playable characters, radically different progression structures to anything we'd seen before, and 2 playable characters that swapped out with each other in real time, you'd think that these games had a healthy amount of variety to them. And they do, but that just means that not once did anyone really sit down to refine a given style and make sure it flows properly, which is ironic considering flow motion was introduced in Dream Drop Distance. Hell, the only sequel that didn't screw with its pacing, Chain of Memories, was a largely linear game that so radically changed the gameplay that people were just confused by its existence. And the fact that it was a Game Boy Advance sequel to a PS2 game. And the fact that it was a real-time battle system that was card-based. Geez, the more I look back on this game, the more it seems like a fever dream, but I know it actually happened. So this should beg the question. If the format of all these different games led to pacing issues, what should Kingdom Hearts 3 and other sequels do to address it? Well, knowing I'm far too late to influence even a single person on the Kingdom Hearts 3 development team, I'm still going to give my opinion anyway. Maybe one of you aspiring game designers out there can come up with a way to use it. Well, to begin, let's go back to basics, grab the rough blueprint from Kingdom Hearts 1, with 1 or 2 worlds serving as hubs we'll periodically return to, effectively the Traverse Town of Kingdom Hearts 1 and the Twilight Town Hollow Bastion combo of Kingdom Hearts 2. From there, we'll go out and visit the Disney worlds that are under threat from the big bads trying to do their own thing. I don't know, it looks like they're trying to look for more princesses, so bam, we've got bad guys doing bad guy things, giving us reasons to visit these places. During the main quest in these worlds, small little side stories open up but aren't explorable because we don't have the proper moveset yet, a la the Metroid franchise. The deeper we go into different worlds, the more we pick up new abilities that let us access areas in older levels, typically only 1 or 2 to a level that round out a few small side quests that have been levied at our heroes. These side quests are not mandatory in the slightest and will most likely be overlooked by casual players the first time through, but will certainly reward replayability. After that, each individual level will be completely done. There's not going to be any halfway break that forces us to go back there. Maybe we'll go back there to grind experience, gather crafting materials, or even just to chill out in a cool world, but we don't have any storyline imperative to return. This return method will also apply to our quote-unquote hub worlds, where we gain new abilities that let us access more of a much larger map, while making the map simultaneously easier to traverse overall. Doing this in the hub world would slowly reveal more worlds and open up more places to go, making this level of exploration mandatory, though only occasionally. That method would then culminate in some kind of penultimate showdown that would open up a path to the final world wherein we would have our big showdown with Xehanort and his posse. Build and write a game around that structure and I think you'll find players pleasantly surprised with how smoothly it goes down. None of this admittedly takes into account how flow motion works in Kingdom Hearts 3. For all I know, the exploration like this is going to be completely upended by it, which if it is, I can only pray that Nomura knows what the hell he's doing. I guess I should have a little faith since Mario and Zelda made similarly big leaps this past year and became apples in the internet's eye, but I do have that niggling doubt that progress isn't synonymous with forward. Oh, and avoid giving away major plot points right out of the gate, that should be self-explanatory. I'm not sure what else that's left to hide, given this game is coming out with baggage from, what, 8-9 other games? Unless they're planning on introducing a whole new monster faction, I don't think there's much else they can do. Who am I kidding? They literally introduced the second Organization 13 in Dream Drop Distance and didn't even blink. I'd be less surprised at this point if they revealed that Master Xehanort was just a very dexterous poodle this whole time. I know my path through this video has been kind of circuitous trying to get to the point, that Kingdom Hearts didn't quite know when and where to deliver its big plot points and that in turn led to a drag in its pacing. But I hope they got across how difficult it is to actually hash out pacing itself. It's a very finicky rule of writing that can be undone by one misplaced scene or line, and it can happen even without you realizing it. Overall, I think the first Kingdom Hearts paced itself superbly and was one of the reasons I fell in love with it. And the reason I ended up a little less impressed with Kingdom Hearts 2 was because it didn't maintain that level of quality even with a bigger budget, a larger team, and more time. It is by no means a bad game. It's still one of my favorite games of all time thanks to all the elements it ultimately brought to the series. But I'm not going to go around singing its praises with everyone else when I can see noticeable cracks in the facade. Oh, and there was that one time they tried to fake us out with Goofy dying that was kind of cheap and lazy. That might have damaged my opinion a little bit. Please remember that all these are just my own thoughts on the matter, and you can feel free to discuss them in the comments down below so long as the conversation remains civil and informative. For anyone that wants to support the channel, I do have a Patreon page, or if you want a more one-time donation, I have a collection of short stories for sale on Amazon, both in print and digital formats. Please check out both of those in the description down below, and once more I'd like to give a huge shout out to every single one of my patrons that make this work possible. I love you guys, please never change. Thank you all so much for joining me on this little diatribe. I do hope you had some fun along the way and maybe learned something, either from me or about yourself. That's all I have for now. Catch you all on the flip side.